When it comes to money, I hear a lot of people when they walk through the doors of the consulting room saying, I'm bad with money. Yeah, it's a very common thing to believe. And when we begin to unpack that, I'm like, well, what does that mean? You're bad with money? And the answers differ. Sometimes it's, I just don't understand investing. And I'm like, okay, well, then there's a gap in your knowledge. That doesn't make you bad with money. From what you've told me, you're quite sensible with your saving and your spending. It's just this area of your life you want to learn more from.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne.
And I'm Antonia.
And in this episode, we'll be unpacking some of the psychological habits that might be affecting your finances. Joining us today is Vicky Reynal, a leading financial psychotherapist and author of the award-winning book, Money on Your Mind, The Psychology Behind Your Financial Habits. Vicky, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to sort of dig into your book, which also won one of the Investing Insiders Book Awards too. It received really high praise from the judges. One of the judges said, before people can make positive changes in their financial habits, they need to understand the reasons behind their current habits. This book really helps address this in more ways than I've seen any other book before. And another judge said that this book provides a unique perspective. As the UK's first leading financial psychotherapist, Vicky invites the reader to explore money-related subjects while thinking about their own financial emotional awareness.
Thank you. Very nice comments.
So thinking about the book, I mean, it's a great read. I've got a copy here, which is, incredible. Could you take us a bit into what actually drove you to write the book and some of the themes that came together?
Well, I wanted to help people better understand their relationship with money because I had talked about it in my own personal therapy, trying to understand my own relationship, my family's relationship, how the two linked together, where was it influenced from past experiences and from watching other people relate to money. And I wanted to give that experience to other people. And I think that there's generally a reluctance to talk about money in therapy. It's not really seen as the space to do it, but money can be driven, our financial choices can be driven by our feelings and often are. And sometimes when we don't recognize that, we can end up in financial situations we're not very happy with or in patterns that we can't get out of. So I really wanted to give people a book in which they could maybe recognize themselves in the stories of the clients that I present and in some of the habits that I try to unpack and work through so that they could maybe have an aha moment and say, well, maybe that's what was driving my money behavior, my money habit, and feel more empowered to change that.
For someone who hasn't read your book, who would it most benefit? Like at what point in your, in your relationship with finance or anything like that, would you suggest someone pick this book up?
Generally, I think there's two reasons to pick it up. One is if you're feeling stuck in a relationship with money you're unhappy with. So it's, people who maybe overspend or who might find it really difficult to spend without feeling guilty. People who are afraid of investing, who end up in financial conflict with others all the time, who are too generous or keep money secrets. I go through all these different topics in the book and try to help people get to the bottom of it. What's the roots of this money behavior? So either somebody who feels they have a problematic relationship with money, but I think it can also benefit people who don't, because we make money decisions every day, all the time. Money is part of leading a life, and we come across it in small ways every day. And sometimes even the small decisions are driven by unconscious feelings. And the more we understand those, the more we feel in control of our finances. So even if overall we have a good relationship with money, I think this book can help you have an even better relationship with money because you understand why you're making the choices you're making. And in my experience, it's not always rational reasons. Sometimes they're irrational ones.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like there's a real synergy between, certainly you can see it with mental health. that has a direct impact on financial outcomes. So, someone who has a sort of a severe mental health disorder that can really translate into a very unhealthy relationship with money, and they often overspend, and even on a much more sort of day-to-day basis, people will spend when they're feeling a little bit blue or a bit sad, all of those sort of things. So you can really see that there's that synergy in your everyday sort of like feelings and everything like that, and how you react with money. I just one of the things that you mentioned just now was about people being afraid of investing, and we see this all the time with what we do, trying to help people overcome that fear. And it feels like in a lot of other countries, they don't have the same fear of investing that we do in the UK. Have you sort of explored more into that?
Yeah, so fear of investing can come from many different sources. Sometimes it can be past experiences of having made mistakes, trying to make money, having lost, and that leaves a scar that you can't, quite pick yourself up from. Other times, it's even hard to take the first step. And maybe you were taught that investing is something that, is only for rich people to do. It's too risky. The sensible thing to do is to hold on to money. So it could be money scripts that you inherited that stop you and hold you back. Other times it can be a personality trait. Some people are generally more risk averse than others. And so beginning to unpack what it is for you that is holding you back from investing is the easiest way to then find an answer to how you can then begin doing it. The more you understand what is stopping you, is it fear? Is it fear of making mistakes? Because that was something that was, frowned upon and really punished when you were young. And so now you're afraid of doing it as an adult. Or is it fear of losing money because you don't quite understand your financial situation and how much money you can afford to lose if you were to invest? There's different sources to our fear of investing, and beginning to unpack that and really get to the bottom of what it is for you, I think, is what's important and what I help my clients to.
So do you get feedback from people who have been through this process with you or who have read your book and they go, oh my God, I couldn't quite get over that line, but that your book has changed that for me, or our conversations have changed that for me.
Yeah.
How does that sort of look in practical terms?
Well, I get different kinds of feedback, which is great. One is the emails that I get from readers who write to me and say, oh my gosh, I now, I understood what the conflict in my marriage was about. It wasn't really about money. It was about all the underlying themes that get attached to money. Or, emails about, I understand why I was overspending. I think it was my loneliness I couldn't deal with. And now I'm coping with it in different ways. Before I was just, scrolling on Instagram and just buying things that would make me feel better. So I do get those emails, and it's great to receive them because it makes, writing a book is quite an endeavor, and it makes it worthwhile when you see it's having an impact. But I also get the feedback through the clients that I work with in therapy, and you see them changing over time and beginning to take steps that they didn't feel they were capable of before. When it comes to money, I hear a lot of people when they walk through the doors of the consulting room saying, I'm bad with money. It's a very common thing to believe. And when we begin to unpack that, I'm like, well, what does that mean? You're bad with money? And the answers differ. Sometimes it's, I just don't understand investing. And I'm like, okay, well, then there's a gap in your knowledge. That doesn't make you bad with money. From what you've told me, you're quite sensible with your saving and your spending. It's just this area of your life you want to learn more from. So, and then you see people kind of having that moment and say, okay, maybe I'm not terrible with money. Maybe there's pockets of my relationship with money that I can work on. And they take the first step. They sign up to a course. They begin to invest a small amount of money, and you see them get better and build that confidence, which is really rewarding.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So if you had somebody, for example, who was afraid to open their banking app, I know loads of people like that. they can't bear the thought of opening it. They'd rather just live without that knowledge, and they wait till it runs out. What's the first step that someone like that should take, do you think?
Well, I would begin by asking themselves, what is the fear? What will they find out? And sometimes spelling that out is really helpful. First of all, you can hear how ridiculous your fear might be. It might be a fear that they'll open it up and the money will all be gone. Well, why would it? Is it more of a fear that you've been out of control and you've gone off and spent more than you could afford? Well, if that's the fear, let's unpack that. When do you feel you're out of control? So you see, I think it's about being curious about that, what's holding you back. So a lot of people leave opening their banking up and procrastinate and put it off because of the fears. And the fears just keep building up and they become kind of catastrophic fantasies that feel just too much to deal with and to cope. So sometimes one of the most effective ways to deal with those sorts of fears at a practical level is to give yourself the task to open your app every day. Set a time and maybe as soon as you wake up, you open it and you look at the number in there. And the idea behind that is that the moment something becomes a habit, then the emotional charge of it decreases. So you're giving yourself a lot of experiences of opening it up and finding out that there's nothing catastrophic in there, nothing dramatic happened, it's okay. And then you're giving yourself that experience again and again until you don't even have to think about it. You can just open it up without feeling that sense of fear. I think that's one good coping strategy. But to get to the bottom of it, I think it is worth digging a bit deeper and finding out what the real fear is about. Is it a fear that you will make the same mistakes your parents made when it came to spending? You're afraid you'll be like them. Or is it a fear that you'll be out of control because you've seen yourself be out of control in the past and build up debt? Or, so I think kind of developing that curiosity to wonder why you're afraid of opening your app or any other financial behavior, I think is important.
I think it is really interesting thinking about money and I guess financial habits in that way. I think one thing that your book does really well is talking about finances as almost like a relationship and the way that it can be dynamic. So even if you come into it with those fears, it's something that can change over time. I guess one thing with relationships is when you think about attachment styles and how you have kind of formed as a person and go into it, a lot of that happens quite early in life. So when it comes to trying to, I guess, backpedal and see where those habits might have started, what are some of the tasks or activities people can do to, I guess, explore that curiosity and get to the root of what might be triggering certain financial habits?
You raised a very good point there about attachment styles and how those can impact our relationship with money, because I've seen a lot of people who might sabotage financially just to have the experience of being rescued, because when we're rescued, it means the other person cares and we feel close to them, and that reassures that they won't leave us. Other times I've seen couples maybe rush to merge finances, again, because they were anxiously attached. They wanted that reassurance that the other person will stay around and want to be with them closely in the way that they desire. And the opposite is true as well. I've seen people being, creating financial barriers through money, maybe keeping secrets so that they don't feel they've given everything to the other person, because in relationships, they're afraid of closeness and intimacy. So our attachment style very much can impact our financial behavior in the present. And our attachment style is determined by our early relationships, our relationships with our first caregivers. And so I think being a bit inquisitive about what is it that I'm afraid of in relationships? Is it that, to be too close to the other, or is it to feel too big a distance? What's my operating model when it comes to relating to others? And the more we're aware of that, the more we can wonder, where am I using money in a way to regulate how I feel safe in a relationship? Am I being too generous sometimes because I want to hear gratitude? I want the other person to feel indebted to me. So I think really attuning into the different ways in which we might be using money to bring the other person close or keep them far away, even in friendships, not just romantic relationships. I think it's worthwhile.
It's really interesting here you say that, because the minute you start to list out those kind of attachment styles and how it can affect how you operate with money, I can instantly start putting those onto people that I know, and I'll go, oh yeah, that makes so much sense now. It's really strange, because I mean, probably with everybody, you're going to know people who hoard money and they have a problem with spending. Like they can't spend money, and they just almost collect. And then there are people that can't hang on to money. They'll spend it the minute it comes in, and they'll spend a bit more as well. And they can't collect. They have to spend constantly. And yeah, what you're saying is that a lot of that is an inherent style that's within you. And is that an inherent style that is learned, or is that an inherent style that is something that you're born with? Because if I look at someone like my own family, say I've got a very big family, I have 5 sisters. I can identify people within my 5 sisters who are polar opposites in that thing. So I'm just wondering, were they born like that because we were all raised the same?
Yeah, you bring up a very good point, because I get asked that all the time. How are siblings with the same parents so different in their relationship with money when they've had the same parenting? It must be personality. I would argue a few things. One is that they weren't really raised by the same parents. I think you're very different when you're a first-time parent from when you're a parent of the 5th child. You might be much more anxious, much more maybe controlling or on top of it at the beginning, and then be much more relaxed later. But that's just one aspect. Different people in the family also have very different experience around sharing. For example, for the firstborn, they get all the attention themselves, and then they have a bit of a sometimes traumatic experience around sharing. Things get, that the parental attention gets taken away from them from one day to the other, and they have to learn to deal with that. And how we feel about our relationship with money is very much influenced by our ability to share, to believe that there's enough love and enough resources for everyone. I think that can really influence whether somebody has an abundant mindset around money or a scarcity mindset around money. If your experience was that, there wasn't enough parental attention for everyone, then you might go about your relationship with money thinking that there isn't enough money for everyone. So you become fiercely competitive, and you become envious when other people have, because then there isn't enough for you. There isn't a sense that there is enough for everyone. You can't relax in that sense that, we can all make money and be okay. So you see how different siblings can have a different experience. I've seen, for example, a man who was the last in a long string of siblings, who ended up pouring money into a venture that he had started with his friends. And it was clearly not going too well. But whereas all the other business partners were managing to not put too much money into that venture, he kept pouring his own personal savings in. And as we were unpacking that, what emerged was that as the youngest of many siblings, he always felt he didn't have enough to bring to a party. Everybody else was better than him. That was his experience growing up. And so when he did this business venture with other people, he approached it in the same way, feeling, they're more skilled, they're more this and that. And all I have to bring to the party is money. So I might as well keep pouring money in to show that I'm worthy of being part of this venture. So I think there's so much that shapes who we become, yes, there is our personality that we're born with. There's also the relationships that shape us, with our parents, but also our siblings' relationships shape us. And schooling, coaches, teachers, our colleagues at school, they all influence who we become growing up. And some of the difficulties with money that I see in the consulting room have been shaped by difficult experiences in school, for example. So I think there's so much that can make siblings become different despite having the same parents.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more. I suppose looking at your own background and looking at sort of your learnings around psychology and psychotherapy, at what point did you start making the links between the financial aspect of people's emotional well-being and how that manifested in their financial habits?
Well, as psychotherapists, you're trained to think about the meaning of anything that people bring to the consulting room. So, their relationship with food, their relationship with people, and their relationship with money. Maybe money wasn't historically that much focused on in psychoanalytic writings, and so it wasn't really focused on in the trainings, but we have the right skills to do it. And the thing is, I think maybe because of my dual background in business and psychotherapy, I wasn't afraid of the topic when it came up. I think it's human that some therapists who might not in themselves feel comfortable in the relationship with money might shy away from it in the consulting room, but I didn't. It was there to be talked about, and so we unpacked it. And so far before I called myself a financial psychotherapist, we were talking about money in the consulting room because it would come up. A disappointing Christmas gift. Why did he spend so little on me? And why did that make me so angry? Or people finding themselves giving too much away. Why do I always set up relationships so that I end up giving too much financially, emotionally to other people? Or why do I always please my friends by buying them the extra round of drinks? All these questions come up. And so I was naturally interested in it because I had studied both. And then it almost became a passion, something that I wanted to do for people when I saw the benefit of having done it in my therapy.
Would you say money is one of the topics that came up quite frequently? I mean, I'm sure you kind of look at a broad range of things that people talk about in sessions, but would you say that finances were quite a common theme that came up as something that people wanted to resolve?
It certainly came up in the mix of things that people want to resolve. The difference now is that people come to me with that as a presenting problem. But before it came up, the same way, relationship with food comes up in therapy. And I think we're not helping ourselves as a society, not applying that same kind of thinking to the relationship with money. I think now it's quite normalized to think about, sometimes it's emotional eating. Sometimes it's, you're eating because you're bored or you're eating because you're anxious. Why aren't we thinking about why we're spending or why we're hoarding or why we're afraid of investing in the same way, kind of applying a lens that's, beyond what you should do, but it's also why aren't you doing what's best for you sometimes.
Vicky, can I just ask you, what do you feel that the role of financial advice is or could be within this sphere? If somebody has an unhealthy relationship with money, is generally financial advice a useful tool for people like that? Or is it something you still need to address that mindset or does financial advice help address that mindset? Or, what is its role?
It's a complex answer. I would definitely say that financial advice has a lot of psychological benefits for the client. Now, I'm not advocating that financial advisors should be therapists. I think they should know that they can refer to therapy when they see people who are stuck, who they don't feel they can help, who they're giving advice to, and the advice is not being followed. I think they should know when to refer. But I think that people get a tremendous benefit from going to financial advisors. There's the peace of mind that somebody is helping you look after your finances. There's that external accountability, knowing that you have that meeting coming up makes you pull yourself together a bit and look at those numbers that you've been avoiding for a while. They offer reassurance in time of volatility and turbulence. So I've seen people come to me and say, oh, I'm so glad, I want to see a financial advisor. But I also see people who come to me and say, well, I've been to financial advisors. That's not the problem. The problem is I still can't bring myself to invest, or I still can't stop spending more than they're advising me I should.
Okay, that's interesting because my sort of thoughts around it was how much of the issue is centered around control. And the amount of control that you have, and that kind of, are people sort of going, I'm never going to get that kind of control. I'm never going to get on top of it. I'd rather just not even think about it or know about it. I just want to sweep it all under the carpet. Sweeping stuff under the carpet's a very British thing to do anyway. So do you find that the British are worse than other countries? I'm not asking you to throw us under the bus, but it's always helpful to know where your limitations are.
Well, I think there's a lot of shame in the UK around money, even simply in the desire to pursue it. Yeah, if we compare it to the American culture, I think it's much more accepted that going after money is not a bad thing. There's no shame in it. But I think even when people are trying to do what's best for them financially, they feel like they have to kind of tone it down, not be too overt in their pursuit of wealth. So I think that's kind of the most striking contrast. But I have seen across culture, avoidance, vagueness, and denial be the most common used psychological defenses when it comes to money. So we keep things vague because we don't want to look at the concrete numbers and face the truth. We procrastinate. We might deny the truth either about debt or about the real reasons why we're not investing, or any kind of exploration or asking ourselves the difficult questions. It gets avoided because they are difficult questions, and sometimes the answers might be quite painful to face, or they might be simply difficult because we're exposing the fact that we need to be a bit braver, or we need to ask questions when we're afraid of judgment, so we hold back.
Yeah, I mean, it's often considered quite sort of poor form to talk about money in the UK. We've got this sort of culture hanging over us. But do you think we're getting better? Do you think we're moving in the right direction?
I think the younger generations are helping change the taboo around money. And there's, good and bad things going on. I think the availability of apps and information through their phones is creating both threats and opportunities. The threats are the commonly talked about. There's a lot of gambling advertised to them, or investment opportunities. They can't tell if it's genuine advice or if they're being sold something. It's very difficult to tell what's coming from a reliable source and what's coming from somebody who's trying to even just gamify something and hide the risks behind. So there's all of that. But there's opportunities as well. The fact that this generation is more interested in money, is less afraid of asking questions, of demanding knowledge, of reaching out for information, is slowly breaking that taboo. There's conversations going on TikTok and trends around money that are trying to, even loud budgeting is one that comes to mind, because it is all about being assertive that you're trying to save money and you're unafraid of saying that to other people. You're not going to be held back by your fear of judgment. You're going to be upfront with friends. And I think those are healthy trends that are helping normalize talking about money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot more of the younger generations investing than the older generations. And it's interesting when I hear you talking about taking something that that is a fear and making it mundane. So, repeating that action over and over and over again until it becomes, just as part of your everyday life. And I guess that the difficult is that first initial step, which the younger generation seem to be able to take with a lot more ease than, say, my generation. And my parents' generation is even worse in my experience. They really are hanging on by the fingernails going, no, I can't do that. It's almost like gambling and all of this sort of thing. So if you could give, do you have a tip that somebody could take as part of just taking that first step into investing?
I would say start small. Ask questions. The thing about starting small, by the way, it's that it helps build a virtuous cycle of confidence. So you start with a small amount, you see that you can do it, that there's nothing too scary about it. Of course, you have to first do your research and gather information. It's not about investing anywhere, but it is about not being afraid to take the first step. Maybe it is about reaching out to an advisor and having that first chat with them. But whatever the first step is, it can be just a small one, so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. You don't feel like you'll regret it as a result. And it can, sometimes it's action that brings confidence rather than the other way around. You don't have to wait to feel confident to do it. You can just watch yourself challenge some of your fears in small ways and then increasing as you go on.
Yeah, that really ties in, because that's often what I say is just start really, even with £10, and just experience the process. Because I think once you experience that process and you see how it wobbles, but it goes up, then that can give you a lot more confidence about putting more in. But if you put it all in at once and you see that wobble, then I can understand the fear.
I think all of these things are so valuable, especially sort of starting small and seeing where it goes. Thinking more holistically and breaking down taboos and making the conversations around money a bit more normal, I guess. How important is it to kind of have a community around that? And whether that's building your own or finding people, like how important is it to have some kind of accountability system, which also helps you kind of stay on top of those habits and keep building confidence?
Well, I think a community is great because if it is a safe space in which we feel we can open up about money, ask questions without feeling judged, see how other people do it. Not everybody has the right answer. We all do it differently, and so being curious about, how do you budget? I use this app. I use an Excel sheet, or whatever it is. But being a place in which we can express curiosity, in which we can test different ideas, it's great because it helps build our confidence. And it is quite alienating not to talk about money. And I can see that in people who struggle with debt and hide it. And, secrets can be isolating enough, but, sitting with debt, and it can be self-destructive in more than just a psychological way. So I think it's important to share with others that we can trust and learn from others. But the one thing to say, and maybe it goes back to what we're talking about with teenagers as well, is that it's important to have a breadth of people that we talk to about money, so that we're not just getting, let's say, reinforcement just for our own ideas. And I know a lot of young people, for example, they're at a life stage in which they're much more open to risk, which is why they're more open to investing. Now their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet, so sometimes it's not necessarily a good thing that they're taking on all this risk, because they're not really able to come to terms with and understand how much risk they're taking. So I would say, if you're, I don't know, a young person investing in, I don't know, in crypto and bitcoins because that's the latest trend, then maybe having somebody in your community who might also give you a more balanced view, a different view from your own, not just more of the same messages, can be helpful as well, if you see what I mean.
That bit that you've mentioned just now about young people being more likely to take risk because of that development, do you find that that's the case with men and women as well? Because in my experience, men feel a little bit more risky than women.
Yes, that is a trend that it has been, not just a trend, it's been researched, and it's a difference. Women tend to be more risk averse. They might think more about the longer term and more in terms of safety. And probably because we're kind of pre-wired to think about the family and protect the wider family, whereas the men are, even evolutionarily speaking, they were the ones going out and taking big risks to bring the big bounty back home. But I think that manifests financially as well.
So in your experience, how does that shape women as investors? Does that make women better investors or worse investors or not investors at all?
Well, I think like with anything, it's how you use it. Are you using your risk aversion to stop you from investing it, or are you using it to maybe be more of a longer term investor rather than looking for the quick wins? You're in it for the long term. You're thinking more about the overall family's balance in terms of diversification of the investments rather than your own kind of individual return, which might be more of a male approach if we're really generalizing. But I think it's all about how you use it, and same with the men.
So does this disparity between the way that women and men approach risk, do you see this as an issue with couples? Like, because I don't know whether you work with couples.
I work with individuals, but they always bring up the relationship clashes when it comes to money, and they tend to be.
I'm sure they do.
They're so often about, well, he's taking too much risk, and I don't want that. I don't like that. It makes me feel unsafe. I don't think it's sensible, and so on. Some the differences around investment risk come up all the time. And then the other big one, it's around spending. The usual difference is one being much more conservative with the spending, and the other one spending more easily, and all the conflicts that come up with that.
Are there any situations where people might be, or how do you bridge the gap between people who might have like incompatible money sort of personas? How do you kind of make that into one overarching, this is how we're going to balance the way you approach things, the way I approach things, and hopefully just have a more fulfilling joint relationship with money?
So the way to get from incompatible to complementary is to recognize that there isn't a right approach to money, but that every person's approach has its pros and its cons. And it's quite simple, but actually couples, first of all, tend to polarize as time goes on. So if somebody, let's say initially was a bit more loose with the spending and the other person was, a bit more conservative, over time, they might tend to end up much more in their own kind of end of the spectrum, if you will. So one person seeing that the other is spending so freely begins to save even more because they watch the other person spend, and so they feel that they have to take on the role of the sensible one, and so they can polarize. And what happens when they fight is that they keep defending their corner and saying, well, this is why I think we should enjoy money, because money's here to be enjoyed, and that's why I'm spending it, and we should spend more. And the other person, making all their arguments. But there's two dimensions that get missed, which is, what's the downside of What's the downside of spending money? Well, obviously, there's not enough there, maybe for the long term, for the pension and so on and so forth. And what's the downside of saving so much money? Well, you don't end up enjoying it. And actually, when you end up recognizing the downsides of your approach to money and the upsides of your partners, then that's when you create a space in which you can talk about compromise. You can think, well, I actually envy a bit how my partner can enjoy their money in a way that I feel guilty doing, and maybe I can learn something from that, and so on. And the same with different risk appetites and any other difference when it comes to money.
It's absolutely fascinating. There's such a synergy between our approach and our psychology around it all, and how it. I mean, I know that my partner has definitely changed the way I am with money, and so and I think in exactly the way that you've just described, actually, where I've sort of gone, oh, okay, he likes to spend, I need to save more. Whereas I was probably a bit more frivolous before I met him. I can see how that sort of plays out. Brianne, I think we're running out of time. I feel like we're only just scraping the surface of this.
You could definitely dig into a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, you could definitely dig in. I'm like having to hold myself back here. But I find it a really fascinating subject, actually. And I have read a few books on this. And I would definitely recommend to people listening that they pick your book up, because I think it's a really good starting point to understanding your own relationship with it. And I think once you can understand that, then it can really help you approach it in a different way. And possibly like really change future outcomes for people as well. And get rid of a lot of the guilt and the stuff that you're not actually dealing with. It can just help you just sort of understand, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. Oh, this is quite normal. This is quite common. So yeah, it's a great book and definitely deserved its place in our awards.
Thank you so much. I was so thrilled to receive it.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, I think that the book breaks down everything so well, and it gives you a chance to pause and just have a bit more awareness about where you're starting from. We're all in a different place. We've all had different experiences, but it doesn't mean you have to be stuck with the habits that you have. There's always room for growth. So thank you so much, Vicky. And we will put a link to your book. And where else can people find you, actually, if they're looking to connect with you after this episode?
They can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well. And if they ever have any questions, I also write a column in the Times, so they can send in their questions and I'll answer them there.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.